peeps, welcome to another video. Today it is my SpoonFlower fangirl sponsored how to make a 5-panel circle skirt tutorial video. That's a super long title and I'm going to have to narrow it down. Before we even start, I'm going to address a couple of elephants in the room. I got bitten on the arm last night and yeah, I now look like Popeye. This is with antihistamines and cream on it, and I also got bitten on my forehead here, and it's taking all the willpower in the world that I don't actually possess to not scratch. So yes, that's why my arm looks so weird. But anyway, we were here to talk about one of my favorite companies, SpoonFlower, and when they approached me and wanted to work with me and wanted to sponsor a video, the initial reaction was pretty much a lot of squealing and a yes, 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 please. I have been aware of SpoonFlower since I think 2011. One of the bloggers that I followed had designed some prints to put onto fabric, and I was just like, that's amazing, and went and had a look at SpoonFlower's website at the time and was just utterly blown away by the types of things that were available. And it was just like, oh my god, this is awesome. So when they approached me and said, can we work with you, I was like, yes, 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 yes you can. I was so excited, and I was racking my brains about what kind of video that I wanted to make with one of their fabrics, and you guys have been asking for the 5-panel circle skirt for so long, and I thought it was a perfect way to combine the two because I could get a beautiful large directional print, which is the ideal thing for a panelled circle skirt. So before we dive into the tutorial, I wanted to tell you a little bit more about my history with the company. I can class myself as a super fan because over my 2 accounts over the last 7 years, I have spent nearly $10,000 with them. Yes, you heard me correctly, $10,000. To have a looking at my order history here, this is only one of the accounts I have with them. I have a business account as well. You can see that I have spent a lot of money with SpoonFlower over the years, and I have no regrets. None at all. Now, a lot of that was fabric for my company setting up and the ready-to-wear that I was offering then, and more of that since then has been me recommending the company to my customers to go to them to pick out a print that they loved, because the range that they offer is just mind-boggling. And I have a giant pile of fabric here and this is all stuff that I have bought myself over the years, and yeah, I thought I'd show you a quick look at some of the prints that I've got. Now, some of you might recognise this one. It is a peacock print design, and this is actually a customer's order, and it was the lining that we used for her coat. These are some of the ones that I've had in my stash for years and I just don't know what to do with them, but they're so beautiful. You all know how much I like leaves. Another really pretty floral there with lots of bumblebees on it, which is really cute. This is going to be a lining for a jacket. It's pugs. Then this one, oh, this one I loved so much because it is actual equations. I just thought that was genius, and I really want to make a shirt out of this because I think it's brilliant. And I have a comic book dress and people read me when I go out in that one, so I can imagine people trying to solve me when I go out wearing that in a shirt. This one is a toile fabric, which is a French design, but if you get close up, it's actually Doctor Who inspired. It has Gallifreyan writing on there. There are Daleks, there are TARDISes, there are weeping angels, I believe. Yes, there's weeping angels. So that is a very traditional looking fabric but with a modern twist, which is one of my very favourite things. Star Trek. If you get far away enough, it kind of looks like a polka dot, but when you get close up, yeah, that's the Star Trek emblem and the Starship Enterprise on there. This one is one of my favourites. It's actually a photograph of tinfoil. So all these fabrics I'm showing you here, I have bought over the course of the last 5 years, and I have them in my stash and I am yet to use them because I'm waiting for the perfect project to use them with. One of the lovely things about SpoonFlower is that the designer, you can upload and design your own fabrics, or you can trawl through the massive range that's out there. But when you order from a designer, more often than not, I've received a message from them just saying, thank you so much for the order. If you want anything else, let me know. If you'd like any of my prints resized, let me know. If you'd like them in a different colourway, let me know. And that's one of the lovely things. The other thing is as well that the designers receive a commission every time you buy a fabric with their print on it. So yeah, it's a really just amazing resource. The fabric is definitely not a cheap option, but you do get very high quality fabrics with gorgeous prints that aren't unavailable anywhere else. I've had customers who play Ingress, and she had an entire dress with ingress fabric on it, and ingress is one of those games that you play and you have to go out into the world to certain points to play it. So she goes and plays ingress in her ingress dress, and I'd never have found that print anywhere else. So it's a wonderful resource for that type of thing. And the ordering process is super easy, and I'm recording my screen here, so I'm going to show you what I'm looking at. So this is my homepage, and this is a list of all my favourite patterns. There are quite a few in my list, and I don't think any of these are going to just surprise you. Lots of florals, cute animals, octopi. There is the one that I've eventually gone for, the flamingos making a splash, and I particularly liked this one because she'd done it in a few different colorways. So there was the pink, and she's also done it in a few different scales. So once you've picked your print, which believe me, you can spend hours on this website searching for things, you then need to decide what type of fabric you would like it on. And if you're unsure about the types of fabric that they offer, you can order a swatch kit, and they will send you a little swatch of all of their fabrics. And the really nice thing is, I've had a few of these over the years, and they've now added colour dots to them. And they also send you, I believe these are the Pantone colours, they also send you a card showing you what the printed colours look like on paper, so you can get an idea of how it comes out on fabrics. And so we've got the organic cotton sateen ultra, which is what I ordered, and I ordered that because I wanted something that had body, and I wanted something that showed the colours quite vibrantly, but I also wanted something that was natural fibres, because I intend to wear this skirt in the summer, so I wanted something nice and breathable. But they have so many options here, and yes. So the other thing that this colour card will tell you is what to expect from the fabrics. So the cotton fabrics, natural look and feel, fabric, hand and colour both soften in the wash, and that is true. The cotton silks, which is unfortunately not a fabric base that they offer anymore, but the cotton silks do, the prints lighten over time, whereas with the polyester fabrics, the prints tend to be a little bit more vivid, and they wash really well. So there's that to bear in mind. Having said that, I've made this into a dry clean only skirt because I want to maintain the vividness of the print that I have as is. So once you've picked your print, you then need to pick your fabric, and you can do that here, and they have them listed under the knit fabrics, and then the wovens, and then the performance fabrics at the bottom. And as you can see, there is a very large range of different fabric bases for you to pick from, which is great. So once you have picked out the type of fabric you want, I want the cotton sateen ultra, you can then go into the amount that you want. You can have a look at it as a test swatch, as a fat quarter, and then by the yard, and it tells you how wide the fabric is as well. And then I wanted 5 yards, so it gives you an idea of what your repeat looks like, and it goes down to, I believe it's 3 that it will add up there. So you just add that to your cart, and it goes in your cart up there. Oh, I don't want both of those. So if you want to save for later, you can do. As you can see, I have quite a few saved for later. So you want to make sure that you are viewing, for people in the UK, you want to make sure that you're viewing your totals in English, and once you've put in your address, it should automatically take you to the English site, because they have 2 print sites, 2 print locations now. They print in America and also in Germany, and if you order in English pounds, you will have your order printed in Germany. The shipping is quicker and less expensive, and you're much less likely to get hit with import fees, which is awesome. So on the home page, they have the trending now section, they have the all-time bestsellers, they have the challenge designs, and then they have the daily favorites. And this is a really cool way, if you're getting overwhelmed, you can go in and have a look and see what other people are buying, and it can take you from, oh, I'm so sorry, my internet is so slow. So they also have the other designs by that designer here, and then they have customers who purchased that also had a look at these. So it gives you kind of an intro and a starting point if you're overwhelmed and you don't really know what you want. This is the latest challenge winner, and CJL Designs is actually one of my favourite designers, and I've bought quite a few of their prints over the years. My favourite I think was Toadstool Terrariums. So if we go and have a look at CJL Designs, then you get to see their homepage and all the designs that they've put up. I love the Moody Cubist cats, that's on my wish list, and also the geckos, love that. I actually follow this designer on Instagram as well. Here we go, Toadstool Terrariums. I made a Deer and Doe Belladon dress out of this fabric. That dress has since been donated because I decided that the skirt shape on the Belladon wasn't quite right for me, but I have my eye on getting some more of this to make another dress because I love it so much. So yes, this is the kind of ordering process, and the hardest part is picking a fabric that you want to buy. Let's start with, hang on, let's see if we can, oh I know, so yeah, any Doctor Who fans out there will recognise these little guys from the Adipose episode where they were on Earth and it was a miracle diet pill and it was making people shed weight overnight and they were shedding their adipose fat. And I really want to get this on their sports lycra to make myself some sports leggings to work out in, because I'm just working off my adipose, and adipose is an actual type of fat. So I just thought that was really, really funny and lovely, and I could totally see myself making leggings out of that. So I mean, when I say the sky is the limit, the sky is utterly the limit. So you can always approach your favourite designers as well and ask if they will work with you to tweak one of their designs to your perfect specification or design you something new from scratch. So the whole site is literally the sky's the limit. Whatever you can think of, you can find it on Fabric, which I love. Right. Do you think I have gushed enough about SpoonFlower? Can you understand how excited I was when they asked me to work with them? Yes. So this is a tutorial that you guys have been waiting for so long, and I'm so sorry it's taken me so long to get it to you, but I'm so glad that I waited until this point because I am in love with this skirt. It is beautiful. It's my favourite colours, it's my favourite shape, it's nice and twirly, it's going to be great for summer. So let me show you how we make it. Today I'm going to show you how to draft the pattern, I'm going to show you how to cut out the fabric so that the print goes in the right direction, and I'm going to show you how to put the skirt together. So let's get started. For this tutorial, you're going to need a tape measure, pins, string, pencil, a long ruler, a matching zip, matching thread, matching bias binding, fabric for your lining, the By Hand London Circle Skirt app generator. My phone's currently updating, so I will be using my phone to get the app once it's finished. Last but most definitely not least, you're going to need a directional fabric. Technically you don't have to have a directional fabric, you just have to have a fabric of your choice, but this particular type of skirt works very well for large directional prints, like this one. I forgot, you're also going to need scissors. Scissors would be helpful. So I've got a super large piece of pattern making paper here. Don't worry if you can't get hold of super large stuff like this. You can always tape together pattern making paper. You can buy it by the roll from Amazon and from lots of different sewing supply stores. You can get hold of relatively inexpensive pattern making paper, but these I've got a roll from Moreplan. I have 300 meters and it was 120 centimeters wide, and that cost me about £70, and that got me free delivery as well because I spent over 40 quid, and I bought that about 4 years ago, and it's going down. It's definitely going down, but it's going strong as well. So I have an extra large piece because what we're going to do today is we're going to draft a full circle skirt pattern first. But if you've watched the previous tutorial, we drafted the front panel and then we put two separate back panels together. This time we're actually going to put a line up the middle. We're going to draft the front panel and the back panel together and not cut on the side seam line, because we're going to not use that side seam line. We're going to put different seam lines in, and it's going to be much easier to do so if you have the whole of the circle drawn out, or the half of the circle drawn out. So that's the first thing we need to do is get our circumference or our radius from the By Hand London app, and my phone is still updating, so I'm going to do that as soon as it has finished updating. I know what I mean. Okay, so I've got the app on my phone this time, and I'd like to work in inches, please. I would like to make a full circle skirt. It's going to be a midi. And now this is important, the waist measurement does not include any wearing ease, so you need to measure your own waist, you need to add the amount of wearing ease that you would like in your skirt to that measurement and put that measurement into the generator. So my waist measures 27.5 inches at the moment, and I would like 1.5 inches of wearing ease, so I am going to put in 29 and click do the maths please. And so my waist radius is 4.5 inches, and it says here, just so that you know, your skirt will not fit onto a standard 45-inch width fabric, so make sure you go for something with a 60-inch width. Now don't worry about that too much, because we're going to panel ours, which means that it will, and we're going to take into account the width of our fabric, which will mean that this is not something you need to worry about. So you need to measure your radius, and you need to put in your length and then draft your pattern, which is what we're going to do now. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is draw a parallel or perpendicular, one of the two, line to the straight edge of the paper. Then we need to mark on our waist radius, which for me is 4.5, and quite a lot of you for the last couple have pointed out that I could do this with a compass, and yes I could if I had one, but I don't, so I'm going to try something a bit different today. So I'm marked on, and rather than just doing the one side of the circle skirt like we did for the full circle skirt tutorial, we're going to draft both sides at the same time, which will help us work out where our panels need to be. So I'm going to draw little marks at a couple of points around here, and then I'm going to go old school. So seriously gone old school, and I have tied some string around the end of a pencil, and it needs to be as close to the lead of the pencil as possible. And I'm then going to put my pencil on the 4.5 inch mark that I've made. I'm going to put some pressure on the center point, and it worked really well that side, but it's not worked so well this side, so let's try again. Oh, okay. A bit more difficult that side when the tripod was in the way, but that middle line is good, so this one here. So now that I've done it for the radius, this is my waistline with seam allowance included, so there's actually 5/8 of an inch seam allowance included in the measurement that you get from By Hand London. So the next thing that we need to do is the length of the skirt, and I want mine to be 29 inches long. So yeah, I want mine to be 29 inches long, so I need to measure from this line and then add the 29 inches for the length of the skirt. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to add a few marks so that I get an idea that my string method is working. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put pressure on the string at this pivotal point here, put it down and just draw around in an arc. And I think I'm going to have to move you guys to do that because you are in the way. Sorry. That worked really well. It's so much quicker. So now that I've done this side, I'm going to move the paper down and do the other side. Mark myself a few guidelines so that I know I'm kind of hitting in the right area, and it means I don't have to measure everything once I've drawn the line. Again, you guys are in the way. Much better. Right, high-tech stuff. Okay, so the next thing I want to note is that there is seam allowance around this the waist circumference, but there is also seam allowance on this side and this side. So there is seam allowance here and here. because if you were to draft this pattern normally, you would only be drafting 1/2 of this, and you would then be cutting it on the fold, which you can't see. So there is seam allowance on this side and this side of the quarter circle part. And if you were drafting this pattern normally, you'd only be drafting this side of it, and this is the cut on the fold side, and then this is the side with the seam allowance. So we have 2 lots of seam allowance already included and built into our pattern. And we need to remember that when we're adding the panels in and adding seam allowance to the different panels. Okay, so the next thing that we want to do is work out how wide our fabric is and fold it, because we're going to cut our center front panel on the fold. So with SpoonFlower, they do have, when they print, they do have white borders, and one side is larger. So this is a larger border than this side, and you want to, if you have SpoonFlower fabric, you want to remember that, because I have on one occasion matched my salvages up, was cutting right up to the white border on this side, and I ended up with little bits of white on the other side of my pattern pieces. So yes, make sure that you're lining up the print edge, not the selvage edge, with SpoonFlower fabrics, because of the print border that there is. So we are going to measure. So it's 28 inches folded. The printed area is 28 inches across when folded. So that is what we're going to take into account when we mark out the first part of our circle skirt panels. Right, so once you've worked out how wide your fabric is folded for your first piece, your first pattern piece, you want to take your tape measure, and ours is 28 inches. So I want to err on the side of caution, and I want to go for, get that straight, I want to go for 27 inches for my first panel. So I need my first panel to be that big. So once I've made that mark over there at the 27-inch point, I then need to draw a line from that mark to this center point here, and my ruler's not long enough to do that, so I am going to kind of eyeball it. So I'm starting off my line here. There we go. So this is our first pattern piece. This one is going to be our front, and it's going to be cut on the fold. So put in your cut on the fold marking, and then you want to make the rest of your panels. So this is highly scientific, and it's just an arbitrary way that I've decided to do this. I'm going to measure with my tape measure on its edge from that first panel all around the waist circumference, and it's 10 inches. So I'm literally going to divide that in half. So let's do it so you can see the numbers. And there, so that's going to be where I put my next panel line. So as you can see, not highly technical in any way, shape or form, but it does work. So there we have our centre front piece. Excuse the size of my arm, I got bitten by something yesterday, I look like Popeye. So here's our centre front piece, here is our side panel, and this is our back panel. We're going to cut along these lines that we've drawn, and we're ignoring this line because this was just our starting point for drafting our pattern, so we don't need to worry about this line. What we do need to worry about are the seam allowances that are on either side of this line, because obviously they are now in the wrong place. So very technically, this one I'm going to designate as being here. Obviously that is not an accurate line. So this seam allowance I've now moved to around here, so that one's gone. And then this seam allowance I'm going to move to here. So there's seam allowance here now. So we still need to add in a seam allowance on this side and this side of this pattern piece and this side of this pattern piece. So hopefully that makes sense. So these two seam allowances, this one I have moved round to here, and I've not done anything to it. I've just said that it's now here because I have this inbuilt seam allowance in this pattern piece, so I have arbitrarily now decided that it's here rather than here because we're not cutting down this part. And then this seam allowance I have decided is on this front skirt panel piece. So this panel piece, when I cut it out, I don't need to do anything to that one. I do need to add seam allowance to this bit, and this bit, because when we cut down that line, it will be the stitching line that we are cutting down, and when we cut down this line on this side, it's going to be the stitching line that we're cutting down. So the easiest way to do this is you just cut these panels out. So you're going to cut out along the circumference there, you're going to cut along that line there, you're going to cut along that line there, so you're going to end up with 3 pattern pieces. So we're going to cut all these out. We're then going to add seam allowance to those 3 points. Okay, so I've cut the lower edge out, but before I start cutting the panels out, I've actually marked them with what they are. So I've put the line in here to indicate to cut 1 on the fold, 5 panel circle skirt, who it's for, what date it was drafted, the size that the waist is, and included the amount of wearing ease that I've added in. This is the pattern piece, it's the front panel. We want to cut 1 on the fold, and there's a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. So then this one is the side panels and all of the same information, and then this one is the back panel and all of the same information. So the next thing that you want to do is add some notches to your seaming lines, because with a normal half circle skirt, or sorry, a normal full circle skirt, it would be very easy because you have a front piece and a back piece, so it's very easy to work out which piece goes where. But this one, you'll have your side panels and your back panels which are the same size, so you want to put on here where your notches as to which piece is going to match up with which. And the way that I like to do that is, that's 1 notch, and that's nice and high up for the front, and then there you go, that's another notch, and that's nice and low down for the back. So literally I've drawn a line through there and 2 lines at the back there, so that I'll know that the single line at the top is to match the front to the side, and then the double line towards the bottom is to match the side to the back panels. I've drawn nice long lines because we're going to cut through them and add seam allowance onto it, but once we've done that, you just extend your notches into the seam allowance you've added, and then that should work for piecing the skirt back together. So I'm going to chop all the pieces apart now and add the seam allowance. So next up, I've got my side panel, and I need to add seam allowance to both sides of this. So I'm going to do this one first and then this one. Okay, the final thing that you want to do is draft the waistband, and I personally like mine to be 1.5 inches deep. I'm going to add seam allowance all the way around this, so the top edge, the edge that's going to be attached to the skirt, and these are going to be the ones that are the back seam. So I need to add 5/8 of an inch seam allowance to all of those. So now that I've added seam allowance all the way around, you want to write in what this is. So it's the 5 panel circle skirt waistband. For me, I like to put the date on just so that I have an idea of when I drafted something. And it's a 29-inch waist, which has 1.5 inches of these. You want to cut 2, and it's 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And that just gives you as much information as you will need if you come to make this pattern again in the future, because obviously there's going to be no instructions with these patterns. You've just drafted yourself a sewing pattern, so give yourself a pat on the back. Right, so I have ironed my fabric. I have 5 yards, so just under 5 meters, so about 4.8 meters. So it means that I cannot be picky about print placement. But I think because even though it's a large print, I think that's going to work out okay. I have folded it so that, well, you can just about see my fingers there, so that the edges of the print are lined up, not the edges of the fabric. And I am going to cut this out. I'm just going to fit my skirt panels on. I'm going to have some really big pieces left over, but I am going to just get my skirt panels on. So I do need to be careful about every centimetre or inch of fabric. But yes, the first one I'm going to cut out on the fold, and as you can see, this piece perfectly fits on to this fold because we measured how wide the fabric was and made our panel the correct width. So this one's going to be cut out like this, and the rest are going to be cut out on a single layer. Okay, I've moved the camera around so that you're not looking at everything upside down, because you want to make sure that the hem of your skirt and the positions of your flamingos are the correct way up. Don't cut the panels up upside down. Ask me how I know. I haven't done that for a long time though. But yes, I've now got this on a single layer of fabric because this bottom part is too wide to cut out on the fold. If you want to cut all of your pieces out on the fold, you can definitely do that. You just need to make your panels smaller so that the bottom part fits into the 28 inches that this particular fabric measured folded. But I'm going to cut mine out on single layers. I'm again being as economical with the print as I possibly can be, so that corner up the top there is touching the cut line already. I am actually overlapping a tiny bit into the white border there, but that is going to be taken up by the seam allowance. So yes, as economical as you can possibly be. So I managed to delete the clip of me adding in the grain lines to the skirt pieces like an idiot. Sorry. So on this freeze frame you can see this arrow is pointing to the grain line that I have put in. What you want for your skirt panels is the grain line to be down the centre of each skirt panel, so that when you place it on the print, the centre of each skirt panel has the print running straight down it, which means that the print will be going a little bit squiffy towards the side seams, but down the centre part of each skirt panel the print will be dead straight. Okay, so I've cut out my front panel on the fold, I've cut out one side panel and one back panel. I now need to cut out another side and another back, and when you're cutting on a single layer you need to remember that the first time you do it pattern up, second time you do it pattern down. So I've turned my fabric over, I have my back panel on here, I'm going to pin it, cut it, and then pin on the second piece. Now I'm actually going to have quite a little bit of fabric left over because I have been so economical with my pattern cutting, which is awesome because I'm probably going to be able to get a shirt out of it. Yay! Matching outfit. So once I've cut out all the skirt panels, the final piece I've cut out is the waistband, and I've cut one of those because I'm going to line this skirt in white cotton lawn, and I'm going to cut the inner waistband, or the waistband facing, or the waistband lining out of cotton lawn as well. I'm not going to cut a 5-panel circle skirt out of lawn. I'm actually going to use my half circle skirt tutorial for that, and that you will be able to find here, I hope. I'm going to include a card for that if you would like to see how to draft your very own. Okay, so I have a 70 needle in, I have the white thread in. I am going to start by sewing the front panels to the side panels, and I'm going to French seam them, so I'm going to be sewing them together, wrong sides together first. I'm going to mark my notches on the pattern pieces. So there's the notch to attach to the front there, and the notch to attach to the back there, and yeah, so the front panels to the side panels and then side panels to the back panels, and I'll show you as I go. I've sewn all of the panels together, and it's with the wrong sides facing each other, so wrong sides together, and I've sewn at 1/4 inch. I am now going to trim all of those seam allowances down to 1/8 inch, and then I'm going to press them all closed so that the right sides are together, and finish that seam off with a 3/8 inch seam allowance, which will give me a French seam. I'm going to use bias binding to finish off the raw edges of the back seam. I can't French seam those together because I need to put a zip into them. So I have sewn the right side of the binding to the wrong side of the skirt down the folded line, and I'm now going to fold it over and top stitch it down to the right side of the fabric. And for that I like to use my blind hem foot because it has a guide that I can run against the edge of the binding, which means that I get a nice straight line. I do have to move my needle over to the side, and I'm going to move it all the way over to the left, and that's just because it's an easy one for me to remember, because you want any top stitching that you do to be consistent throughout the entire garment. Okay, so I don't actually pin my binding down because I find that it's easier to do it this way. So I keep the fabric and the binding underneath flat with my finger from this hand, and then when I'm sewing it along I push the fabric down, I push the binding down with this finger, and it gives a nice finish there, and you have top stitched all of your binding down. So I'm going to finish both of those. Going to go to the ironing board and press everything, because at the moment I haven't finished the French seams, but I like to get as many things done at the sewing machine as I can before I have to go up and press. I've pressed the seams so that the right sides are together, and then I have sewn at 3/8 of an inch, and I have done that for all of the seams, all 4 of the seams. So this is the right side, and you can see here all of the raw edges are enclosed, so I just need to press the seams towards the back, and then I can attach the waistband. So I've got the waistband here, and I have used a medium weight interfacing on it, which I clearly need to give another press because that's coming apart. But what I'm going to do now is this is clearly the top and this is the bottom. So the bottom is what needs to get sewn to the waistband of the skirt, and I'm going to find the middle part of this. I'm also going to find the middle part of the centre front panel of the skirt and pin those together, then pin the ends together, and then match up the rest of the pins in between. Okay, so I have the waistband pinned to the main body of the skirt, and I am now going to sew it at 5/8 of an inch. And you want to sew it with the skirt portion up because it has more volume of fabric, and you want to make sure it's behaving itself and not getting puckered in the stitching line. This is a flat piece of fabric, so technically it should behave itself very well when you're sewing it. So the waistband down, skirt side up when you're sewing. Once you've got your waistband attached, you want to press the seam allowances up towards the waistband itself. I'm going to do that from the other side, but I just want to show you what I'm talking about. So don't worry about the overhang here. I miscalculated my seam allowances and I added an extra one in that I didn't need to, but I have done the pattern drafting tutorial correct for you guys, so you won't end up with this. Your skirt and waistband will be flush with each other. This is not the end of the world though, because I'm going to put my zip into my waistband, and I'm just going to use a larger seam allowance on this part, and then when I turn this back and put the lining in, this bit will get hidden. So I'm just going to have a larger seam allowance down the back of my skirt than you guys will have, but that's fine. I have got the top of my zipper tape at the top of the waistband. I've pinned it in place here just to get me started, and I've actually found that I do better if I don't pin my zips in, if I sew them as is, because I get less puckering that way. If you want to pin your zip all the way down, feel free to do so. You want to keep it at the 5/8 of an inch mark, and that's going to be your stitching line is 5/8 of an inch away from the raw edge of your waistband, and for you guys for your bound edge of your skirt. So I'm going to sew this in. I have my invisible zipper foot on. It has 2 grooves there that the teeth of the zipper fall into, and I move my needle over 1 or 2 ticks and to get as close into the teeth without actually sewing over the teeth as possible. Once you've got the first side of your zip in, you want to close it, and then I like to put in a mark with my friction pen where the waistband is. That just helps me get the zip into the right position on the other side of the skirt so that the waistbands meet up. So I'm going to pin that in place and get that sewn in. So it's not pressed yet, but that's the invisible zip in there. So I am now going to work on the lining. So I'm going to bind the edges of the lining and then sew the waistband to the lining. I've bound the edges of my lining piece, and as I mentioned earlier, this is a half circle skirt that I'm using to line this pattern. You don't need to have another full 5-panel circle skirt of lining underneath it. This is a cotton lawn, so I have bound the 2 edges, and I am now going to sew the waistband of the lining to the lining piece of the skirt, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to find the middle of the skirt, I'm going to find the middle of the waistband, pin those together, pin the edges together, and then join up in between. All of the waistband is pinned to the skirt, and again I'm going to sew from the skirt side rather than the waistband side, because this is nice and flat and will behave itself, and this could get puckers in it, so I'm going to sew from the skirt side up. Once you have the waistband sewn to the skirt, you want to press the seam allowance up towards the waistband, and then we're going to sew the right side of the lining to the right side of the skirt, and again we're going to sew that across the top waistband in a straight line. The only difference is that we're actually going to sew it at 3/4 of an inch rather than 5/8 of an inch, because that will nicely finish off the top of the zipper. So the next thing that we need to do is understitch the lining to the seam allowance, and you want to stitch 1/8 of an inch away from that seam that you have just put in all the way across. Understitching is all done, so I'm now going to go and press the waistband, and when I press it I'm going to roll so that there's a tiny little bit of the waistband outer showing, and this will just make sure that the lining always stays on the inside. Once we've pressed the seam allowances of the waistband, you need to turn it back so that the right sides are facing each other again. Then we're going to sew the lining to the zipper down to the bottom of the zipper, and I have my regular zipper foot on to do this. At the top here you want to roll both sets of stitching over towards the lining side, and I've started at the top there, and I have my needle 1 tick over from hitting the foot, so it's not all the way over, it's just 1 tick over, and that way I'm stitching close to and I'm catching the zipper tape, but I am not actually stitching too close to the zip and making it so that it won't work. And you want to sew your lining to just about the same sort of area where your zip has finished. So I'm going to turn this one the right side out to show you, and then I'll show you how I've pinned the other side. You also want to clip off all of the excess bulk from this area, but turn yours out the right side just to double check that everything is where it should be before you start clipping, because that's the last thing you want to do, is have to unpick and re-sew with reduced seam allowances. But mine was all, I've checked mine's all alright, so I'm going to turn it around now. This hasn't been pressed as yet, but that is it turned out. And as you can see along the back here, the lining is caught to the zipper tape, but not all the way up to the zipper teeth, so it will function really well. So I'm going to do the same on the other side. Okay, so as you can see here, I've rolled over, so you can see the 2 lines of stitching, which is, one is the seam and one is the stitching of the understitching, so the stitching of the lining to the seam allowance. And I'm going to sew all the way down this side to attach the lining to the zipper tape and the main body of the skirt on this side. And for that I'm going to move the needle on my machine over to the opposite side, 1 tick over, so that I am again sewing close to but not right up to the teeth of the zip. Okay, so I've got this one sewn. As you can see here, I've not trimmed this off as yet because I want to double check that everything is doing what it should do and is where it should be. So there's quite a lot of bulk there at the moment, so it's not going to be the easiest thing to turn out. But yes, that is as it should be. So it's close to but not right up against the zipper teeth. That's working out really well there. Right, so yeah, pleased with that. That's all sitting as it should do. Won't focus on the right thing because that's too far. There we go. So it's meeting nicely there. It's meeting nicely at the top. Need to give that a trim and give it a good press. The next thing we're going to do is sew up the back seam. Okay, so next thing we're going to do is sew up our back seam. Now my back seam is going to be a lot larger than yours because, as I said, I have mistakenly added an extra 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to be aiming for this line of stitching here, and I have my zipper foot on, and this time I'm going to move my needle the entire way over to the right so that I can get in as close as possible to that line of stitching there. I'm not going to be able to match up with it exactly, but I'm going to overlap it by about 2 or 3 millimeters and back stitch there, and then just stitch all the way down to the hem. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing with the lining. Okay, so next we're going to be sewing up the lining, and we're going to attempt to get in close to where the stitching stops, but it really doesn't matter if there is a bit of a gap here, and the last thing that you want to do is catch any of the skirt into this stitching that you're going to do, because you'll just have to unpick it. So personally, I'm going to start my stitching from about there, and there will be a hole in my lining, but that's okay because no one's going to see it. So same thing, start stitching there, back stitch, stitch all the way down to the hem, and then we're going to work on finishing off the waistband. That's the back seam closed up, so that needs a really good press. So once you've pressed it, we're going to attach the waistband together by stitching it in the ditch, and we're doing that so that the lining stays in place and that the waistband doesn't roll out. To secure the waistband to the lining, we're going to stitch in the ditch along the seam line created by the waistband being attached to the skirt. Now I've used pins, and I have pinned through the ditch, as it were, and I've made sure that the waistband, the inner waistband, the waistband lining is lying flat, and that it's all caught up nicely. The seam allowance is pressed up, so the seam allowance will all be caught and encased in the waistband. So I'm going to start at this edge, and I'm not going to start right here because I don't want to catch the zipper teeth. I'm going to start probably about 1/2 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch inside of the line, back stitch, stitch in the ditch the whole way down, and back stitch at the end, and again stop about 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 centimetre away from the zipper teeth. And when you're sewing, you kind of want to put some tautness on and make sure that you're really getting into the ditch. I'll show you as I'm going. When you're stitching in the ditch, you want to make sure that the line of stitching is actually in the ditch. Doesn't matter if you waver too much over into the skirt area, but not too much, but you definitely don't want to waver over into the waistband because that will be really, really obvious. And when you're sewing, and again I'm trying to do this with one hand, just put some tautness on both sides of the fabric so that you really expose the ditch of the seam and then you can sew inside of it. And that's the line of stitch in the ditch that has then anchored the waistband in place on the inside as well, and that will just keep it, as I say, from moving around and rolling about. So the only thing left to do now is hem this. Now I'm going to get away with not hanging this because I don't think any of the bias is going to drop with this fabric. But if you have any kind of doubts, hang your skirt up and leave it for at least a day, day and a half before you start hemming. I tried this method of finishing the bias binding last time I did it, and I really liked how it came out, so I'm going to use it again. So we're going to sew the right side of the binding to the right side of the skirt, and when you start, you want to fold back the raw edge of the binding and stitch over that. And I folded back probably about 3/4 of an inch there, and yeah, I'm going to start stitching there and stitch all the way around, matching up the raw edge of the binding with the raw edge of the skirt. And then when I get to the end, I'm going to continue the binding over this a little bit and back stitch, and that way we will have a neat finish when we turn everything around. I personally don't pin my binding on. I pin it on to start so that I can get an accurate start point, but once I've done that, I do it by hand, and I, as I say, match up the raw edge of the binding with the raw edge of the skirt. So I have finished the hem off, so that's the starting point with it folded under. I've gone past it by just over an inch. When I turn that round,
and stitch this down by hand, then I can just stitch that bit closed as well. So the next thing that I'm going to do is press the binding that I have just sewn on under, and again doing this with one hand is interesting, and you want to end up with about 1/8 of an inch of the outer fabric showing, and it's going to end up getting pressed like that the whole way round, which will then get stitched down by hand. But before I actually go and press that, I'm going to start sewing the lining hem as well. I want the hem of my lining to be about 1/2 an inch shorter than the hem of my main fabric. So I've actually just run a line of stitching at 3/4 of an inch all the way around, and I'm going to press that up to the wrong side, and then run another line of stitching and then trim and then do a narrow rolled hem. So I need to go to the ironing board now because I can press the bias binding on this one and then the first part of the narrow rolled hem on this one. So I've pressed up the hem of the lining, and I have done that just slightly more than the line of stitching, and I'm now using my blind hem foot to run another line of stitching on top of that first one to secure that down, and then I'm going to trim off the excess. I've trimmed off the excess that I have sewn up, so I'm now going to go and press this up again and sew it again. I've pressed the seam up once more, and then I have run another line of stitches along it. So there's one line of stitching visible on the right side, and then there's 2 lines of stitching visible on the inside, and that's the narrow hem finished. So I'm going to give that a press, and then I'm going to hem the main body of the skirt by hand. Right, so when you are hemming your main fabric with the binding, I like to do this by hand, and I take a small couple of threads of the main fabric and pull my thread through, and then I'm into the binding, and about 1 inch in the binding and then, oh, got my thread caught on the camera. Then I want to take a small chunk or a small couple of threads from the main fabric and just to repeat. And you don't want to do this too close together, the stitches, because you're turning a larger circumference up into a smaller circumference. So if you do it too tight, you'll end up with lots of puckering, which is the last thing that you want, and also it'll take you much longer. So I take about 1 inch of the binding, and then a couple of strands of the main fabric thread on the needle, and that gives you a nice looking hem.
So I really hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comment section down below, and I will do my best to answer them. You can totally use this method to make as many panelled circle skirt as you want. Today I've used it for a 5-panel circle skirt. I have used it in the past for a 16-panel circle skirt with a stripy fabric because I wanted a chevron star effect on the full circle, and that looked utterly awesome. So yes, this method will work for any amount of panels that you want to add. Remember that if you do make your own 5-panel circle skirt or any panel circle skirt using this tutorial, to remember to use the hashtag #ShawnMadeMeDoIt, because I love seeing what you guys have been up to on Instagram. It's awesome. I really hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!